Welcome to the Tenet Podcast. Today, we have the honor and privilege of sitting down with Mr. Ed Dwight, sculptor, historian, painter. We're really honored to have this opportunity. Mr. Dwight, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah. I want to get some of your backstory. You were born and raised in Kansas City, is that correct?
That's correct. Kansas City, Kansas. Now,
Kansas City, Kansas.
That's important.
Yeah, it is important, right? Because some people mess that up.
Yeah.
Were you always creative as a child?
Oh, God, yes. I started school when I was 2 years old. And they came to, I lived on a little farm outside of town. And my mother was kind of proactive and everything. And there was a woman that she had a PhD. She was a beautiful black woman. And it was equivalent to a Head Start program. And this was in 1935. And so they wanted to do this study as if you started black kids in school early enough, could they learn? They were still worrying about whether black kids could learn in 1935. And so she gathered up to do this thing funded by the federal government. She rounded about 30 black kids. And in fact, that's where I met my wife.
Really?
We're 2 years old. And so this art thing started just popping out immediately, and so I became the class artist in all through preschool and through kindergarten. And I was a class artist through elementary school. And I was a school artist when I got to high school. And so this art thing was just all kind of inbred or something. It's just totally natural. It wasn't anything that I tried to do and everything. And Mom got me a library card when I was 4. And I was between the library and my time was spent in the library studying the masters, studying the great. I'm 4 or 5 years old. I'm studying Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and I started painting, mimicking these guys' paintings. So I did my first oil painting when I was 8, and so and I was an altar boy. She got me on as an altar boy when I was 5, and I was an altar boy for 12 years, and I was seeing all these paintings in the church and the statuary in the church, and I was all imbued by that. And that's what the center core of my art was all about: religious paintings and art and drawing of religious figures and stuff like that. So that was all inbred, And then my other secret passion was because we lived outside of town, we bordered on Fairfax Airport. So I got a chance to walk to Fairfax Airport every day. Some part of the day I'd spend, and they gave me money for cleaning out their airplanes. And most of the flying was between Kansas and Wyoming and Colorado, because they'd come here to hunt. And that's where there was no war at the time. So and I was very curious about where the hell these guys went. And where were they going when they left, and where had they been, and what kind of stories could they tell, and all that kind of stuff. And so I started hanging around the mechanics, and I guess that's kind of between my grandfather, who was a junk man, and hanging out at the airport and handing these guys tools when they needed them, to fix these engines and stuff. I got a little mechanical flair when I was a really young kid and everything. So my grandfather, he had a mule and a horse, and that's how he made his living, as collecting junk. So when we go around town, my job was to jump off the truck, grab what he spied, and throw it in the truck. If it was too heavy for me, he'd have to help me to get it up on, not the truck, but the carriage. And he'd take it back, and this guy could make anything. I mean, it was nothing this man couldn't form from junk. And so I started doing the same thing. I was making I would make kids' toys in the neighborhood, and I was making scooters, and I was building airplanes. I built a full-size airplane when I was out of orange crates, because Mom taught me to do the shopping. So I was the one that had to go into town and do all the shopping, and I had a wagon. And I noticed that they threw away all the orange crates. So I would go down there and bring all the orange crates out there, and I built a full-size airplane with a cockpit, and I would take the kids on trips, imaginary trips to Paris, and tell them about the Eiffel Tower. No, I'm serious. And I make the airplane noise. I had, because when we take off, you got to make noise. So and everybody thought I was crazy. Everybody around this dude was off his rocker. But I was constantly, you get skates. We got skates every Christmas. And everybody had a set of skates. So kids are interesting. They use them for a month and throw them away. And so I started taking these skates and taking them apart. And I'd put one on the front end of a 2x4, one on the back end, and now I got a scooter. And all I had to do was put this deal up. And so everybody's now so they would ride the scooters where they wouldn't skate because we had to put the skates on, Mm-hmm. They didn't want to do that, But they take that scooter and they'd ride all over the place with them scooters that I'd make, So, but anyway, that was, I was into this creative thing really, really early.
And so your grandfather, he was kind of a catalyst in some ways because he really helped provide an environment where you had, not only did you have the creative mind, but you saw what your grandfather was doing and you were like, hey, this is great. I can do this too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the man made things out of nothing.
Yeah.
And that's or taking things that had usages in another venue or another area and make them, he would make tools and plows and all this kind of stuff that we needed on the farm. It was crazy. All the stuff that we needed on the farm there. And he would make it. I mean, rather than go buy something, the guy would sit down and make it. And I learned all about torches and heating up metal. And he didn't have a welder. He welded by heating the metal real hot and hammering it together. All the molecules would join. And as I say, you get the same result, and just hammering things together. I mean,
that's amazing.
Like that. Yeah, totally.
So you, from there, after you graduate high school, you go to college?
Yeah. What happened was I integrated at White High School back in 1948. And what ended up happening was we were Catholic. My dad's family didn't have much of a religion, but my mother was a dyed-in-the-wool Catholic. And so what ended up happening in the elementary school, it was black kids that went there, but we had white nuns that were teaching us. And she wanted us to go. There was only one Catholic high school in town. That was a white high school, okay? And so she went out there, and my mother looked like she was white, okay? And she went out there to see if kids could go there, and they said, of course, no. And so she wrote the Holy See in Cincinnati, which is the next step up. And they said, that's a local matter. We can't handle it. So my mother wrote the Pentagon. I mean, the Pentagon. She wrote the Vatican. I'm sorry, wrote the Pope. And the Vatican ordered this school to integrate.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Totally crazy. So now, of course, I didn't want to go there, of course. I mean, we live one block from the black high school. We had a family restaurant there, right? And that's where all the kids hung out. And I worked in the family restaurant, or the soda jerk in the family restaurant. And they had some really pretty girls that went to school there. And then I was eyeing them because they'd come in after school, and I was like, oh man, that's, really good looking stuff. And my mom told me I'm going to this white school, and I'm going, you got to be crazy. I'm not going out there. And I wanted to go to Sumner. And she said, no, you're going out there. And so I went on out there, and my dad sat down to talk to me and about, what would be race relations, how do you conduct yourself in that world and all that kind of stuff, and he gave me some really sage advice about how to conduct business. And my dad told me an interesting story. He says, the only thing white men respect is knowledge and accomplishment, okay? Don't come to white men whining and crying. What you do, you bring your A game if you're dealing with the white world. And so my father played in a Negro baseball league, and he played with. And so I was a bad boy during the season and all that kind of stuff. Back when Jackie Robinson got picked for the Kansas City Monarchs, I was 14 years old then, and so I saw this, this athletic interaction that. This is really interesting with white folks. I mean, they like to be entertained. That's what my father said. They'll do anything to get entertained. And he doesn't give a damn who entertains him, son, And he told me this story that during spring training, they would go up to Wyoming and Iowa and play the local. And what they would do, they'd take all the aces off the best teams in their league, and they'd play spring training games against these white guys. And so when they got to Sioux City, they would actually put on the thing in the paper, nigger team comes to town this weekend, and so they'd get on the field and they'd bus or roll up. And these farmers would have saved all their rotten eggs and rotten tomatoes. And when the players got out, they would pelt them with these rotten eggs and stuff. And then they'd play the game. And, of course, they'd beat the hell out of the white team. And these same people, after the game, would stand in line to get their autographs. And so I said, wait a minute, Dad. He says, because the white community admires accomplishment. We beat the hell out of their local team. Now we're heroes in their eyes, And that story really sunk into my brain. And so when I went out there, I was a tiny little guy. I went out for football because my dad was an athlete, and I weighed 104 pounds. And that picture right behind you there, I made varsity that next year. And because I could run,
right.
I was really quick, and so this school did not have a track team, and so they built this track team around me because I could run so fast. I ran 7 events on the track team and traveled all over Kansas and Missouri, running in invitationals and stuff, and I was beating the hell out of everybody, And so I didn't go through this. They tried to come at me with calling me the N-word and doing all this kind of stuff, being cute and everything. But when they saw that I did things, and I was an honor student, and I was always all those things, then all of a sudden all this stuff changed. I became a mini hero to all these folks, and I had all I took was art all the way through high school. I didn't take no physics and chemistry, no science. I didn't take nothing but art because I was going to be this great artist. Okay, and I opened up a sign shop when I was 14 in Kansas City, and I had all the stores all locked down. I did all the sales and stuff. Then I had all the churches. I had all the bars. I had all the restaurants. And during the summer, the fairs and all that kind of stuff for all these churches. So my dad built a studio in the back of the house, and I bought my first car when I was 14 years old with my money that I made from art. And I was going to be this artist. And when I got out of high school, I had won, and I didn't know the nuns did this, I had won the first 3 ribbons in the Kansas State art scholarship thing. And nobody had ever done that before. So the nuns took it over to the Kansas City Art Institute behind my back again and said, this is what this guy can do. He needs to have a higher education in art and all that kind of stuff. So they gave me a scholarship to go to the Kansas City Art Institute. And so my old man sat me down and says, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to be an artist. He said, no, you're not. I said, what are you talking about? Yes, I am. I had this art thing under control. And he said, I want you to tell me one single artist that you know that's making any money. Go look around. You don't have to answer that today. I want to know if you can find me one single artist that's making any money, okay? And then if you can do that, I'll support you. Well, I didn't need your support anyway, but, and so I said, well, what do you think I ought to do? He said, you're going to engineering school. That's where you're going. And a train ran through our property out on the farm, and the only engineer word I'd ever heard was the guy that ran the train. It was a train engineer. And so I said, I don't want to drive no train. What are you talking about? I said, I'm not going to drive no train. And he looked at me and said, you want to slap you upside the head. What are you talking about? Are you nuts? Engineer, this is not the kind of engineer I'm talking about. You're going to be an engineer. And so I said, oh, my God. And so I got to thinking about it. I did look around, but I came to the point I didn't know where to look. Where do you look? Who do you, 16, 17-year-old kid, I'm going to get on the phone and call somebody. You know any artists that are making any money? And the answer is resounding no. And there's this mythological thing that artists start this whole starving artist thing. And so I got all these engineering books, and I started reading about what engineers did. And lo and behold, architectural engineering. Aha, I got him. I can draw because that's what they do, you know. And I said, oh, this is going to be fabulous. So I went to this junior college, and I said, I want to do a pre-engineering course. And it looks at my transcript, and it says, no, you're not. Guy, you're going into liberal arts. Whether you like it or not, you're not an engineering candidate. And because I hadn't taken any physics or chemistry, any of those sciences. And so I shopped around, and I found a school, Donnelly College, that would let me in and let me take all these courses. So I took 18 hours, and I took college chemistry, college trade, college algebra, college everything college I could. And then after that, I went back to that same guy, because I asked him, I said, why don't you just let me in? And if I don't get a B average, you can throw me out. And he said, no. And so I came to him, and I had A's and B's on all these courses that I took. And I went back to this guy. And lo and behold, he said, how'd you do this? You know, he started calling people. I just got what's going on? I just do it. He got a B in college chemistry. Wait a minute, something wrong with this, you know? And he just couldn't believe. He thought something was crazy going on, that I'd bribed somebody or something. And I'm this little bitty guy, you know, little bitty black guy. I think I weighed about 118. I was on a roll, you know. And so, but in the middle of all this stuff, which changed my attitude about a lot of things, the Catholic school, to get there, I had to go past the public school when I was a little guy, and I get my butt beat almost every day, and they chased me all the way to school or whatever. So I started boxing in the ring when I was 13. And I had to integrate my boxing training, and I got associated with a gym in Kansas City, Missouri, you know, and I'd go over there and I'd train everything. So I started boxing, and I won the Golden Glove Championship in Kansas City. So now I got this. You wear your jacket with the golden gloves up here and all across the back, gold champion. And these guys stop beating me up.
They won't mess with you anymore.
Yeah. And so I got in conflict with my high school because I was still boxing when I was playing football. And you can't do but one sport in Kansas, you know. And so I got a dispensation. I don't know, somebody called somebody. But I ended up getting a dispensation. And so I was allowed to keep fighting and do my sports and all that fun stuff as well. So anyway, you asked me about high school and all that stuff. All that stuff was all integrated. I was a very busy guy.
I guess.
Doing a lot of things.
Yeah.
Trying to keep them all together.
And you ended up going to ASU, is that correct?
Yeah. What changed my life dramatically was Mom, when I was 9, she told me that I'd been sitting with my fanny too long and not bringing any money. So she went out and got me 2 paper routes, one for the white paper and one for the black paper. And Kansas City, Kansas was the white paper, and they threw twice a day, morning and the evening edition. And which meant I had to get up early in the morning to throw my, you know, and then I had to go. You know. And when I first, I was so small, I had to make three trips back to the pickup point because I couldn't carry the paper. And in the winter, I hated my mom. But what changed everything, every Friday, I had money in my pocket. And so, with all these things that are going on, I was throwing my black paper as a picture above the fold of a black guy from Kansas City who was 5'4", and he had been shot down in Korea. And I looked at that and I said, oh my God, they're letting black folks fly. And I said, you know what? When Mom got me that library card, the war started in 1941, and I was 8. Within a year, about 9, they had put out, and I don't know how this library got the hold of this, but there were 7 Army Air Corps manuals about training pilots. It had everything you need to know about flying, and you know it had a whole weather section in there because you got to know about weather, and a lot of mathematics and stuff in there, but it was practical mathematics. And I had been studying the thing for and that was my secret. And I'd go in there and on this dim light, and I would read. And at the end of each chapter, there was a test. And and I'd been going over these tests to make sure that I got them right. You study to the test.
Right.
Once I found what the questions were, it was easy to study to the test, right? And so, but I had that in my back pocket. But that was my imaginary thing. I mean, it's totally imaginary. I never, ever, ever pictured myself as flying an airplane or being a jet pilot or any of that stuff until I saw that picture of this guy. And so I headed straight down to the recruiting office. And the guy said, I want everything. I want an application to go to pilot training. And first of all, you're too short, man. And you stutter. And I did stutter really badly, really bad. So I didn't talk a lot because I stuttered so bad. And I'd go back down and he said, I'd go down there every day, just looking at the pictures and, and gathering up the goodies that they had later. And he said, don't come here anymore, okay? You're not going to be a pilot. You ain't going to be nothing, so get out of here. So I did what my mother did. She wrote to Vatican, and I wrote to Pentagon. And I told them that I was in college, I was studying engineering, and I knew they were hiring black pilots because I saw a picture of one, and I want to explore that. And within a week, 10 days, I got a letter back saying, great, we'll send a team out to your school. And so I was the first one in line, and 32 other guys signed up. And they sent us all to Denver in 1951. And I was the only one that passed. And the reason I was the only one that passed, when I got here, I started looking at this test, and it was the same exact test at the end of these chapters. Exactly the same. And I recognized it right away. I said, oh, my God, I got this one. And so I finished in about 20 minutes. And I took it up to this guy, and he said, it was too tough for you, huh? And I said, I might have missed one or two. I'm not sure, And I did miss two. It was a 2-hour test, 2-hour and 20-minute test.
And you did it in 20 minutes.
I did it, yeah, because it was all there. Once I saw the pattern, all I had to do was just go through it and mark the thing. It's multiple, all of them is multiple choice, of course. All I had to do was walk right through it, And they called my mom and says, you got a genius on your hands. And they called my school and told them I was a genius. and I lost all my friends because I was running track at college, and all my white friends said, this is a black thing, and why they pick him and not us, not understanding that. I mean, I had done all the work underneath the thing, and I'd done all the stuff, but it was unwitting. I mean, I never thought when I was doing that I was doing it for a specific reason. It was just something I was fascinated with. I was fascinated with flying, the idea of flying, but it was not flying an airplane. If you can, figure that one out, And then Air Force says, we got you. And to get over the stuttering thing, I got out here and I said hardly nothing. I couldn't say Ed because it's soft. But I practiced and I could say Dwight. And they said, what's your name? Dwight, but my first name is Ed. Well, they associated that with me just being nervous, and they didn't pick up that I was a basket case with this stuttering stuff. And anyway, they embraced me, and the first thing I did when I went to pre-flight training, I couldn't do anything about it. I just, during pre-flight, you don't say nothing. Lower classmen, keep your mouth shut, and you just ride and roll with the punches, But when I got to flying, this thing came up really, really. I mean, so what I did, when you study Morse code, they have a room, it's just a little closet, and you put these earphones on, and you study dot, study all that Morse code stuff. But I used that time, I got a clipboard on my lap, and I wrote down every possible thing that the tower would ask you, and I would write it out. And I would find it because you have broken communication when you have to talk to the tower. Say again. And so I would go through each sentence, and I could figure a word that I could start with, and I'd finish that word, and I'd wrap back around to get the front. And that's how I stopped stuttering. I kept working it. I'd go home at night and I was trying to figure out. And it's all your brain is way ahead of your mouth and all that. I kind of went through all this stuff about, trying to slow down my brain because my brain was just going 90 miles an hour all the time. So I had to slow the process down so that I could command the words that come out of my mouth, For all my life, in the month of February, I stutter to this day. So I went to the shrink when I got out. And I don't know what the hell this guy told me. It was something innocuous and stupid that he named as to why I started doing February. Oh, I know what he told me. He says, you're worried about those Christmas bills are coming in. I think you gotta be kidding, dude. You got Christmas bills. I said, what about the years that I didn't buy anything for Christmas? Totally bizarre, man. But anyway, I ended up going to pilot training. I was stationed in Phoenix, and Williams Air Force Base is in Chandler, right outside of Phoenix, and Tempe is halfway between those two. And so my job, which was really cool, I worked 4 hours a day because you had to fly 2 missions a day. You start at 8 o'clock and about 12 after the debriefing, missions an hour and a half. And so now you pre-brief, debrief, and you work 4 hours a day. And so, whoa, I got all this time. So I went on and enrolled at Arizona State in aeronautical engineering, and I got a degree in aeronautical engineering from Arizona State. Cum laude, by the way.
I saw that on your website, or I read that somewhere, and I was like,
I think that guy was right. He is a genius.
Yeah,
there's no doubt.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at your resume, and this is on your website, Air Force test pilot, America's first African-American astronaut candidate, IBM computer systems engineer, aviation consultant, restaurateur, real estate developer, and construction entrepreneur, in addition to being a world-renowned sculptor. Most people would be happy just to be successful in one of those avenues, and you've done all that. That to me is amazing.
I don't look at it like that. I looked at, I'm kind of an opportunistic guy to an extent that, somebody throws down a challenge at me. I do things to respond to that challenge. I think I got that from my mom because everything she did was pretty well calculated, to bring us along in that environment, and it was a tough environment. And all my sisters were accomplished in the things that they did as well. And it had to do with something, especially, when I give a lot of speeches and stuff, and I talk to these, especially these young black women. And one of the things I've noted is that from the time I was born, my mother would come into my little alcove, because I had four sisters. That some of them came later, but I was just her little jewel because I was a guy, thing. And she came into my little alcove every night, and she'd rub me on the head and tell me that I was the coolest guy on earth, that I was brilliant. And that she loved me to death, and I could do anything. I mean, that's all I heard. And she did that till I left home, and somebody, after a while, you start believing it. This whole idea of somebody telling you that you can transcend and do anything, all you got to do is prepare for it. And that she always added that, but you got to be prepared. Mm-hmm. She always added that. That was a caveat at the end of the day, but you got to be prepared. And I guess that's where that all came from, that if I decide no matter what I have ever done, I've spent a lot of time preparing for it, And like when I opened a restaurant chain, I was working for IBM, and I couldn't find any real good barbecue like Kansas City barbecue in Denver. And so I just wanted to do one restaurant, so I'd have some Kansas City barbecue. And I was just going to open it up and and have it there and get somebody to run it. I was going to kind of, going to manage it among my other things and everything. And until I ran into this investor group to get the money to do this. And I spent, this is really bizarre, I spent 2 years developing this barbecue sauce. You know, and I went to the store and I bought every kind of barbecue sauce. And when I was traveling, I'd go to the supermarket, I'd buy every kind of barbecue sauce, and I'd bring it home, and I'd pour it on a piece of paper, and I'd roll it out, trying to figure out what spices they had in it. And so, the fennel seeds, the cumin seeds, and then to cut this whole thing short, I said, wait, no, I'm doing this too much work. So I went to Kansas City. And Ollie Gates owns Gates Barbecue. They had a chain of barbecue restaurants in Kansas City called Gates. And I went to Ollie. I said, why don't you franchise? Why don't you let me buy a franchise from you? Because we need some barbecue in Denver, the kind of Kansas City barbecue. And he told me to go to hell. And so I said, okay. So naturally, his sauce was the sauce. And so I studied his sauce more. And I had to go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture downtown. And I went to the chemical lab, and we went through everything you put in this barbecue sauce, and stuff I couldn't put in it, and stuff I had to put in it chemically. And we got into this argument about you screwing up the taste. Methocel, I got to put methocel in this. What the hell? I don't want any methocel in it. Well, it's good for you because it extends your barbecue sauce, and you can get more barbecue sauce by it's innocuous, neutral. It doesn't have any flavor or anything to it, but it extends, I said, but it screws up the taste. There's a taste that you're after, And so I spent all this time doing, and then when I designed the pilot for it and all that kind of stuff. And so I did all that work. I was working for IBM Corporation. And at night, I was designing barbecue sauce and designing restaurants. And so I left IBM for a crazy reason. I became a star guy down there because I pretty much unseated CDC. CDC had all that's a computer data company. I don't know whether you guys were around then or not. And they had a CU lockdown, the NCART lockdown because they had the fastest computer systems in in core they could get, but they didn't have any peripherals. Okay, in the space program, the spaceship is controlled in real time. In other words, the pilots and the astronauts are going for a ride. They're not controlling anything. The only thing that the astronauts do, if something goes wrong with the system, you can get the man in the loop and change things if you have an emergency or something. But everything is controlled by computers. And so they had a Model 75 now they're controlling these spaceships, in full control of these spaceships. And they were using computers as input-output devices. And what was wrong with CDC, all the information went into a buffer, and all the engineers had to wait to get this information out of the buffer, in the printer and stuff, And so, but if you got a computer feeding that information out, and so it goes from a Model 75 down to a Model 30s and all that kind of stuff. So you're actually in full control of the thing at all times. So you don't have to wait for data to come out. Well, I brought that system into IBM. It's called HASP. I found out about it. And so I became a little mini star at IBM, And so they made a mistake of putting me in charge of recruiting for this 7-state area, because I was this man of all things. I could do all these different things. And so I was bringing all these farm guys in. They had to be taller than 5'10" and shorter than 6'2". Because if you're too short, you don't command the room or your sales. And if you're too tall, you intimidate people. And I got all these rules about how do you hire people, and they prefer a buzz cut, crew cut. I mean, they had all these rules and stuff. And so I was complaining, and they would hire these guys. I would do a recommendation and give them a little test and all that kind of stuff. And so I said, we need some more black people in IBM. And so what I did, I found this brilliant, beautiful woman, man. And she did all the computers for the state of Ohio, had a PhD in computer science, okay? And I bring her out here to interview, and Bob Hawk says no. I said, what the hell? Are you kidding me? And he said, you don't understand, Ed. We got our black guy, and it's you. We don't need any more blacks. Because when we make our reports, I said, this is a joke, right? No, it's not a joke. We have you. I waited around, and I brought another black guy in who was in computer science at CU. He was not retired, but he was a captain in the Air Force. I brought him in to interview. I said maybe it was just because she was a woman, and they turned him down too. And so I said, I'm out of here. So what are you talking about? He said, man, we got big plans for you, Dwight. You're going to be the first black vice president of IBM, okay? And what's got to happen now, first of all, Dwight, you talk too much and you talk too fast. So we're going to send you to apprentice school in Armonk, New York. And what you're going to do is you're going to spend 3 years there walking around behind a vice president of IBM and saying nothing. And you'll be taking notes, of what kind of decisions he made, his pace of conversation, how he talked, and all that kind of stuff. That's what you're going to mimic, okay? And I came in the next day and quit. And so he said, you serious? I said, yeah, dude, I'm gone. I'm out of here. And my backup was my restaurant chain.
So you already had a backup. That's awesome. Yeah.
And wait a minute. No, so in the process, University of Denver had an enterprise program for black folks. And they were one of my clients. So I went over there because I needed some money for the restaurant. And I was just going to do one restaurant, right? And I'm sitting in the room with all these investor guys. And the guys are telling me, yeah, we're interested, but we don't want to do one restaurant. We want to do a chain. I said, a chain? Yeah, we want to spread this all over the United States of America. It's a brilliant idea. I mean, a brilliant young man. And this was when Arby's was coming online, Kentucky Fried Chicken was online, McDonald's was online, And so what I did, I went out and I absconded a McDonald's manual, and then I got a Kentucky Fried Chicken manual, and therefore I sat down and wrote. My chain was called the Rib Cage, okay, and so I went and wrote my own manual, lifting stuff out of here as necessary. So I'd have a manual. And I went, these guys wrote me a commitment for $2 million based on, and I took my barbecue sauce and I passed it around with these guys. And they said, first of all, you got to smell it. I said, this stuff is so good, you can put it on bacon, make barbecue sauce sandwiches out of it.
Oh my God.
So the guys said, you're right, man. And it smells so good. God, yes, we're in. So I walked out there with a good faith check, wrote to no corporation. I hadn't even incorporated. And wrote to Edward Dwight Jr. a check for $250,000. And I went home to my old lady. I said, this is our chance. Where you want to go to Costa Rica? You want to take this $250,000 and hang out of here? So anyway, I ended up with 5 restaurants around town, one in Fort Collins and stuff.
That's amazing.
And then my wife was in politics. And so she was Democrat. Her husband had died, and he was the first black legislator, one of the first black legislators here in Denver. He was a lawyer, neat guy. I got involved in politics, and I was a delegate to the CTA convention, and and I was really thinking about running for public office because I was getting a little bit of name for myself and all that kind of stuff. And Ted Kennedy would come to Denver all the time, and he would talk, and he was chasing skirts and doing whatever, And so I was at this one of the meetings, and this construction guy, one of the larger construction companies, and he came up to me and he says, "I've been listening to you talk for a little while, sir." And he says, "You're the smartest black man I ever heard in my life." And I said, "Well, apparently you haven't met many black men." And he says, "How much you make? $200,000 a month?" I said, "It's none of your business how much I make." Man, I was being all, And he said, "Well, do you make, well, if you want to make a couple $100,000 a month, call me." And he stuck his card in my lapel pocket. And, I got to thinking about that. I wonder, was this guy for real or not, So it had to be 2 or 3 months later. I had about 20 suits. I'm going there one of these suits trying to find this card. Where the hell is it? I found it, and I called this guy up. And he said, "Meet me at the Scotch and Sirloin, not on Grant." He said, "Meet me at the Scotch and Sirloin for lunch." About 4 o'clock, we had Dwight Development Associates. And we went downtown, and that was the first day. He said, "Meet me at 9." And I met him. And he took me to 5 banks in Denver. He got me a $150,000 line of credit with 5 banks. Now I got $750,000. And the guy asked me, he said, Dwight, why don't you come out to my house tonight and meet me at 10:30? I went, what? I said, dude, I am not coming out of your house. I am to meet you at 10:30 because my mind had gone on, what is this about, So I talked to my wife. He said, well, Ed, you're a man. You go out there, you can tell the guy to go to the, go to the devil, tell him to keep his money and all. So I went out there and I got down there around 10:15 or something. And thank God, the woman opened the door, beautiful blonde woman. And I said, yes, yes. So she said, Steve will be here in about 10, 15 minutes. But anyway, come on down. And she had prepared me this great big platter about this big with a great picture of beer and all these bratwursts and salamis and all that kind of huge thing, man. So by the time we got down there, we start talking and stuff. And this guy says, you're going to come out here every night for 6 months, and I'm going to teach you the construction business. And I went out there, and he taught me how to, I had, with my engineering, I did have a background in drafting, but he taught me about structures and how to design apartment buildings and for 6 months. And he made me memorize the Denver Building Code and the Real Estate Code, and I memorized that. And so I passed both of those in flying colors and all that stuff, He said, meet me at 13th and Macon in Aurora. So I ran out there and he showed a set of plans at me. And he said, I don't want to talk to you for 6 months. I want to be back here in 6 months and I want to see an apartment building on that lot. And don't call me. I don't want to talk to you. I want to see an apartment building. And 6 months later, actually about 5 months later, he had an apartment building at 13th and Macon. And that started, and I started building. I went crazy, and I started building all over, everywhere, everything. And I had to go convince all these building departments that I was able and capable of doing it, because they didn't want to give me licenses and especially in the white areas. Man, they were worried about that. Really worried about it. But I was on a roll, and I didn't pay myself $200,000 a month, but I got up $50,000 to $75,000. And I had the Porsche, I had the Mercedes-Benz, I had the Cadillac, and the Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser. And I also had a flying service that we had started out in Stapleton. so executive aviation. And I'd gotten together with 5 pilots that had either retired or gotten out of service. And we formed this company, Executive Aviation. And we were flying. And then I had an aviation consulting firm where I would call these companies up that were transitioning from props to jets. My deal was that I'll meet with you and you tell me what is your range? How far do you want to go? Do you want to go to Hawaii? Do you want to go, and to select an airplane and how many people are you going to be taking? And I had to get all that data from them. And then I would train these guys to go from props to jets and all that kind of stuff, And so I had that company too, and I was making money there also. And but anyway, I was just going crazy with all of these different things I was doing. Everything was working until we elected George Brown, the first black lieutenant governor. I was doing great, and I was making money, and I was, my wife had a gig going to doing summer. She's a retired school teacher, and so she had a gig going to all over Southeast Asia. She was doing a joint venture with Denver public school system and Auckland, New Zealand school system. Because I had already been over there because I was stationed in Japan. I'd been over flying around the Philippines and all that kind of stuff, so I was familiar with the area. But it allowed me to go hang out with her and hang out in Sydney and Tahiti. I've been to Tahiti 17 times, and I'm on this roll, And George Brown calls me in there, man, and he said, Ed, I've been to your house, man, and a couple, I was a party animal, and I was having these parties at the house all the time. But what I had been doing, I bought a house on Montview Boulevard, and I was going to my construction sites at the end of every day, and I was picking up all the old metal in the construction sites and throwing it in the back of my Mercedes-Benz. And I was hearkening back to my grandfather. And I went and bought a welder, and I taught myself how to do, good welding and stuff. And I was decorating my house. And I had all this abstract art all around my house, and I was having these parties and stuff. And at the end of one of these parties, these people would gather these things up and head for the door. And my wife said, "What the hell are you doing there?" He said, "Well, Ed sold me that." So somebody told me, he said, "Dwight, I had about 60 pieces of art I had made. And I got possessed with this good stuff, man, I had about 60 pieces of art, and the garage was getting fuller and fuller and fuller. And somebody said, you ought to have an art show. And lo and behold, I did have an art show, and I sold 45 pieces out of my house. And so anyway, George Brown was elected lieutenant governor. And he said, "Dwight, I saw all that art." He says, "Here's the deal. They need a sculpture of me for the Capitol building as the first black lieutenant governor." And I said, "Well, what are you talking to me for?" I said, "I don't model, dude. I weld nails together. I weld insides of faucets. I was taking all these, any piece of metal I could find, I was making all this abstract art out of it, silly stuff." So, And he said, "Well, you're going to stop doing that. And you're going to stop making all that money because I've got a plan for your life." I said, "George, this is insane. No, dude, I'm not, I'm not interested." And he said, "Well, Ed, let me tell you a story. Do you know that black people have been on American soil for 350 years, and they've done incredible things? And do you know, if you were to go to a museum or a gallery or a town square or city squares, there are no black images of anybody. And if somebody with the Martians would come down and kill everybody on Earth, and they would want to rebuild our culture and our society, they would never know that black people were ever on American soil." So I asked George, I said, "George, what did black people do?" He said, "What? What are you talking about? What did they do?" I said, "What the hell did they do? I went to white school all the way through. I never heard of black history before in my life. I said, "What are you talking about?" And he asked me if I knew who Harriet Tubman was. I said, "What did she do?" And Frederick Douglass, and he went down the hit list of all these people. And he called me pitiful. He says, "Man, you was up there talking to kids and this aerospace stuff. And so what the hell did you tell these kids, man, when you were talking to them?" I just told them to be like me and they'd be successful. He looks at me and said, "You almost came across the desert road and hit me." "You were telling the kids to be like Dwight." Okay. And so anyway, he said, "What I want you to do is go down to the library and get you a book and teach yourself how to sculpt, because you're going to do this no matter what, because I got big plans for you." And in the meantime, this guy went out and got 2 piles of books. And he said, "Go out there and get in that jet, one of them jets you got out there, and I want you to fly around the country, Dwight. And I want you to find me some black images." And so I went and got my little Learjet, and I flew to Atlanta, and I went up the coast, to some of the black centers of power in Baltimore, and went to Chicago, and I just went to Texas, and I could not find it. He was right. And I came back, and he had these 2 piles of books for me to read. And so I took them books home and read them, and I didn't even know that was slavery. I had no idea that all this stuff was going on. I thought that the world started when I was born.
What year was this, so I can put it into
1974.
1974. Okay.
Yeah. And so lo and behold, man, I got so fascinated. He gave me this big project to do, and the state of Colorado paid for it, to do Why Did Blacks Come to Colorado? And once I read them books, I said, man, this is bigger than Blacks Coming to Colorado. So I did they hired me to do 8 pieces of art, and I did 50 bronzes: black horse racing, black cowboys, black soldiers, black Indians. I just went nuts. And the Park Service got wind of it, and they'd seen it in a magazine. And man, they jumped all over me and said, it was like, "We own you now." And so we took that, and I sold all the other stuff. I quit doing what I was doing, and I went and enrolled at the University of Denver in a master's program to get a master's degree in sculpture, because I didn't know anything about art. I really didn't, the way art is today. I didn't learn anything about how art is today from doing that. But I went out there, and within 6 months, I was running the sculpture department. So I ran the sculpture department there for 3 years or so, and I decided that this is it. I'm going to go and get my PhD, and I'm going to be a college professor. That's what, because my wife has to have a PhD, and then she's got all this stuff. So, because we're off in the summertime, we had this plan, until I started running into difficulty at the school because they didn't have any money. DU was a private school. They didn't have any money for the art department. So I went and got somebody. And I went and got a couple of commissions. I got a commission with the American Heart Association, and I brought the money in, and me and the kids did it, and they were learning how to do memorials. I'm teaching these kids how to do memorials, right? And Mel called me in. He said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, "Mel, when I got here, I said, every saw in that school, all the band saws are busted. Everything over there was all busted all to hell. And you got to set up for these kids cutting their fingers off, And so what I did, I went and took that money and I totally bought all new equipment for the art department. And I got chastised about it. He said, "Don't you dare do anything. How dare you do? Are you out of your mind? You got any money, you bring it straight to me." And I said, "Well, Mel," he said, "because the printing department needs money and ceramic department needs money." I said, "Well, why don't you have those guys go out and find some money?" So I found money for my department here, man. What's wrong with you? And he said, "Well, don't you ever do it again." I said, "Well, do it. If that's how you do it, man, I'm out of here. I mean, this is crazy. And I'm not going to live with this." And I'm getting hints to change people's grades because their fathers are rich and all that stuff. But I'm not doing that. That's not, these kids either. They come here and, they're spoiled rotten kids in the first place. I had this one girl tell me if I didn't change her grade, I'd given her a D or an F. I don't know what I did, but she called me and she said, "My father will come here, buy this damn school, and fire your black ass." One of my students tells me this. And I said, "Come on, what's this all about?" So I went and talked. I said, "Mel, what's going on here, man?" He was the head of the whole art department. And so I said, "I got to get out of here. This is not for me, because I'm too aggressive for stuff like this. I mean, I'm a fixer. I'm a world fixer. I run around fixing things, and that's how I looked at my life. I mean, I go find. That's how I got picked to go into this astronaut thing, because I was on fast track in 1960. I was at Travis Air Force Base, and I had gone to Japan, and this is where my height got in play. They were flying B-57 airplanes, and the B-57 was a British Canberra that they had converted so we could use it as a light bomber. And the mission over there, we had a nuclear mission where we were going to blow China off the face of the earth. They had lost 6 pilots prior to my coming over there. And all these guys were under 5'8", 5'8" tall. And I'm coming in at 5'5" or so. And so they said, we cannot let you fly the unit airplane. So they gave me a job as adjutant, number 2 guy to the base commander. So I'm at the top of the food chain, and I'm working for this guy. And I was running around and solving one problem after another. I would see all these problems coming up in the unit and stuff like that. And I was just solving problems. And I got this guy's confidence. This guy's a general. And I said, I need to have a crew. Nope. And I kept beating him over the head. I said, I got to have, at the end of every day, have you been thinking about they giving me a crew? Nope, I hadn't even been thinking about it. And then finally he broke down and he says, Dwight, don't you go out there and kill yourself, please. And he gave me a crew. And he tried to make up for it, because the only other black guy on there was Tom Blanchett, and he was black, and he was a navigator, And Tom was 6'4". And I think he said, well, maybe I'll get this real tall guy. But the problem was I would control the airplane. And the problem was the rudders are out here, okay? Now, if you're short, there was a knob in the middle, and you turn this knob to meet when you're sitting in the seat. So if I'm short, I got to get the rudder. But what happens to the rudder, they don't come straight back. They close on each other, so they end up right here. Now you got no leverage. If you lose an engine, you got no leverage at all, because if the rudders are out here, you got more leverage. And that's what was killing these guys, and the airplane was flipping over and crashing into the ground because they couldn't on single engine, So anyway, every day we went out, and Tom and I won bombing competition, which I was very, very proud of. But every day, Tom would look at me. He said, "You little bastard, if you kill me today, I'm going to kick your butt."
Oh, man.
But anyway, that's what kind of got me. And then when I went to Travis, I had experience at that management level, because I was always fixing things. I mean, something's wrong in the unit, and I was always getting these awards and stuff. So when this idea about finding a black astronaut came up, then it was easy for me, but it wasn't easy because when the president was trying to find this black astronaut, we only had 125 pilots in the entire world at the time.
Oh, wow.
And 90 of these guys were Tuskegee Airmen that had fought during World War II. If somebody in the food chain didn't want a black astronaut, you would take an age requirement of lower than all these guys. So you had to be under 30. And all these guys were over 30. So that eliminated 90 of these guys. The Navy had one black pilot. The Marines had one black pilot, okay? And the other pilots were civilians. They were registered. 3 black pilots were flying for Air France. They were left over after World War II. And the rest of them were puddle jumper pilots in the Caribbean. And so the choices, you're down now to, if you could find 4 or 5 guys that had engineering background, they were performers that had the flying experience and all that kind of stuff. And so I got down to the point where they only had 1 or 2 or 3 people to deal with, and I assumed that I was going to be one of 3 or 4 or 5 guys. So if statistically, if you want one, 0.45, and the hope that one of these guys will transcend. And I went down there and I was alone, and they really blew me away that I went down there, and that's when Yeager and I got, first met and everything, and of course I wasn't in the club. Nobody down there had ever heard of Ed Dwight, because you get a reputation by being in a fighter unit or doing something. It's like John Glenn fought in combat, and some of the first guys had fought in combat. That's where you go to find somebody, and I was not in that club. I had a lot of flying time, but I had been flying a whole bunch of different airplanes. I flew fighters, and I flew light bombers, and I flew B-52s, and I flew KC-135s, and I flew all these different airplanes. But my experience was varied, but it wasn't what they consider in that club, this hard-nosed, dashing guys with the scarves flying in the air, all that kind of stuff. I was not in that club. And so that kind of worked against, with Yeager being at the top of that pyramid. And he looked at himself, I'm the only guy that knows how to pick anybody to do this astronaut thing. And when the president went to NASA, NASA says, we don't do social engineering here, And what people don't know is that the president formed a different space program. So everybody ties this whole thing together. The president created the MOL program, which is the Manned Orbital Laboratory program, and that's how I got to be this astronaut guy, because I was the first black guy to be appointed to astronaut training. Because if I did a whole bunch of historical studies about NASA and where it came from, and at the end of the war, because Germany had a space program before the war was over. They had orbital vehicles. They had vehicles that could fly in space. They had designed space suits, space gloves, space helmets. They had done all that because they had done all this research. And so the idea was, how do you get the research over here? So America went and hired 5,000 engineers that were Nazis and brought them to the United States. And they placed them in different colleges in places all over the United States of America. So there would be no concentration of them in one place. Okay. So nobody would notice it, that they had brought all these Nazi guys over here. The whole American space program was based on, and the reason Russia got ahead of us was the deal that was made between America and Russia was America took the engineers and Russia took the hardware. And so they had these trains running from Germany into Russia with all these booster rockets, hardware. And so all the engineers had to do was find out how they did it. And that's why they went into space and could carry more weight than we could earlier than we did. And so that's what the whole thing was all about. And I began to see, when you asked me, was I pissed off about not doing this? But when you consider all of that kind of stuff, this thing is a lot bigger. There's a lot more space involved in it, a lot more considerations to look at. And it's not just some black guy getting into space and going to the moon or being an astronaut. It's bigger than all that, And I fully understood it, and had I been able to go up, it would have been fine. But when I look at what happened to Bluford, and he was the first guy that went up, okay? He's finally getting some recognition after all these years. So in the beginning, the black community didn't even recognize that guy from nowhere. I mean, nobody knew who the hell he was. And they asked, who's the first black astronaut? Was Ed Dwight? Not him. And he was the first guy to go up. And nobody honored this guy, but he doesn't have any statues built in his name. And I said to myself, if I had done that, that would have been me with this lack of recognition, And then even more makes emotion when you consider that nobody's looking at it as to, and this is very touchy politically, but, and you saw it in that thing about who's driving the bus. And it was always the white guys driving the bus. And so now they got a space shuttle. Now they can put dogs, people, black people, brown people, all kind of people in the back of the bus. Who's driving? Who are the guys that are driving in front of the bus? And that's where the real astronaut stuff comes in. Where you're up and flying the airplane, whatever. And taking that glory. And they talk about this male stuff. The astronaut that has the most command pilot time and missions is a woman, not a guy. Okay. The person that spent most time in space, she just led, it was a woman, And so when you back off and look at this whole thing from a different perspective, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I got through that thing without being dead. All the rest of these guys, within 3 years of my graduation from test pilot school, out of the 17 of us, it was about maybe 7 or 8 that was left in 3 years.
Wow.
They're all dead.
Wow, it's crazy.
It's totally crazy, And in my case, I've been escaping death like you will not believe. I'm the luckiest guy on the face of this earth. Remember I told you about my little executive aviation company?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm downtown, and we were having a standardization ride. That's where you get in the airplane and you go over your protocols and you do a little instrument flying and you just mess around. And I had a real estate closing downtown, and we had a 4:30 takeoff out here at Stapleton. And I was on Quebec, and I pulled out my phone out of that little box that they used to pull back in the old days. And I said, hold up, guys, I got 10 minutes. I'm there, I'm almost there. And he said, Dwight, we'll catch you next month. Man, don't worry. We'll get you next month. You don't need this stuff anyway. They took off. Now I'm in base ops, and they had all taxied out, took off. 15 minutes later, that airplane crashed and killed everybody on the plane. So I would have been there. I would have been on that airplane. I mean, it's just unbelievable. All the death escapes. I was at 9/11, I was in New York. 30 days earlier than that, we were on the 104th floor of Tower 2 giving a briefing on a sculpture of Jackie Robinson that was going to the stadium up there, okay? And so I came back, did all the models and stuff like that. And so we were scheduled. I had flown in, we stayed in Midtown, got in the limo, we're heading for Tower 2, because that's where the meeting was supposed to be. And the limo driver got a call and says, we've changed the venue. We're going to Giuliani's office instead of the tower. And they changed. We went over to Giuliani's office. I put my stuff down. I saw a coffee shop there, and I got out of the limo. I hadn't had any coffee yet, so I was walking toward this coffee shop, and the ground shook about 3 or 4 inches. When I heard the plane coming, and I said, "What is that fighter jet?" He was going at full speed with that plane, and I looked up, and he hit right in the middle of that building, and you saw the wings and the fuselage had just tore right into that building. And I said, "Oh my God!" I said, I was just wigged out, man, because we would have been up in that tower giving a briefing had we not changed the venue. So God has been walking around.
Looking out for you.
I'm the luckiest guy on earth, man.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What's striking me about your story that you've been telling is, you've had these very opportune moments that just kind of, they build on each other, whether it's you're reading all these pamphlets about taking the flight test stuff, and then all of a sudden you find yourself taking the almost the same exam. Right. So you have all these opportunities, but then also that comes along is all these barriers that once you start going down, at least this is my vision, that kind of stop you, but also forces or allows you to take another route. Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
Well, I don't know, dude. I just put the pedal to the metal and keep on going. But I got to figure out how to do it before I go jump off into the Netherlands there. And the whole thing has been fun in a way. And I because of this survival thing, and I am lucky that I haven't gotten killed because all the rest of the guys are gone, and that really bothers me to the extent that they say only the good die young, and I'm worried about that because I classify myself as a good guy, so but I'm still living. So there's something crazy going on there.
Yeah. So a little bit of survivor guilt, maybe, huh? Yeah. That you feel like I'm still here, but all the friends and colleagues that have gone before. Yeah, I think that's common. Yeah.
My main buddy all through pilot training, and this has never happened in my lifetime, but I know about, where 2 black guys go through the whole training cycle together. And Bobby Shelton was from Denver. And I didn't drink or smoke. I didn't start drinking till late in life. And I never smoked and everything. And both of us were 18 years old, and we went into pilot training together. And Bobby could sit down and drink 10 martinis, just, And I didn't, and I'd go to these bars with this dude. And the guy would be stinking drunk, and he'd smoked himself to death. And I mean, all this crazy stuff. And one night we were coming home from, there was a black section of Phoenix where the cotton pickers all stayed, because, cotton was the biggest thing. And when soy went bad in Alabama and Louisiana, it creeped across the South and got to Texas, and by the time we went down there, everything down there was cotton. And all these black ex-slaves would follow, and it went all the way to Orange County. Orange County one time was the largest producer of cotton in the country. And that's before they turned Orange County into what it is today, you know what I mean? And so one night Bobby was at this bar, and Bobby had gone through about probably 11 martinis, I suppose, and I'm sitting there drinking Coke, And so I was tired, and I had a car, and Bobby didn't. And so I was driving him on the way back to Chandler from Phoenix, and a cop stopped me, and I was just sleepy. And they wanted to arrest me for DUI. I said, "No, I don't drink." And then, "Yes, you are." Bobby was in the back seat of the car, asleep. And he heard him. He was talking. He opened the door, and he comes out in the back seat of the car. "Oh, yes, officer. What's wrong here?" And he said, "Well, we got a problem. This guy's been drinking." "Well, yeah, I'm fine. Let me drive." And the cop let this guy sit in the back. We said, I hit him upside his head. I said, you get out of my car. You.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Oh man! But anyway, so Bobby and I bonded a bit, and we were all through pilot training together, As a matter of fact, I applied for a job at FAA, which then was up right off Mountain View out there in Aurora, and when they. These guys that try to kill me, I tell you that, and they try to throw me in jail and all that kind of stuff. Well, they have put a dossier out about 2.5 inches thick, and they had all this stuff in this dossier about I was like James Bond, I was smuggling uranium from Africa into Kazakhstan and all those different places, and I was doing all this stuff, and I threatened to kill President Johnson and. They had the story that I was in Albuquerque on 9 o'clock in the morning in my uniform on a park bench in Old Town Albuquerque, which has this park that you drive around. And I was standing up and I was screaming. I was going to kill the president. This civilian policeman didn't do anything because they had my uniform on. So they called the MPs at Kirtland Air Base. The MPs came out, supposedly disarmed me and put me in a straitjacket. And I was in this straitjacket for 30 days, and according to these reports. When I went into the program for training, there were 3 pages in my background. And I was an altar boy, I was a Boy Scout, I did all these I walked on water and all this stuff. From the time I walked into the program to the time I got out, they sent me 4 cases of source data of all these stories about me with prostitutes and treasonous kind of activity and stuff like that.
All fabricated.
All the smear campaign.
Yeah, and so they sent this out to all the aerospace companies. So that I couldn't get hired. I was blackballed in the aerospace companies. But anyway, a job came out because I had been flying the Lear. The Model 35 Lear came out. So I went out, applied for that because I had Learjet experience, and I'd be headquartered here, be going between here and Wichita, and they'd hired me. And I worked for about a month or so, but my paperwork never came in. So next thing you know, Browning Adams called me and said that headquarters for this area here was in Kansas City. Said that I was a security risk and that I was really a non-person. That I'll never get a government job or anything for the rest of my life. And he's in Kansas City, and he read a couple of these things. I said, well, I'm coming down here. And he said, don't come down here. Okay. And got in one of my and I shot to Kansas City. And I sat in his office, waiting for him to come in. And he brought 3 of the biggest guys. He was about my size. And he didn't know how big I was, I think. So he brought 3 of the biggest guys to sit in the room with him in case I went crazy on him, And this guy's sitting there at that table reading this stuff to me. And I leaped out of my chair and I said, man, that's my life you're talking about here, man. And he told me, you're a non-person. You don't exist. And get with it. Get used to it. You don't exist.
Wow.
So anyway, I call Bobby, and Bobby got the job. I said, Bobby, they're looking for a brother over here. And so anyway, Bobby got the job and everything. So, but I was living with that mess for quite a while.
Yeah. So when did they start really blackballing you like that? Because I didn't know that side of the story till we met today.
What happened was they called me in to the White House. Okay, and
this is after Kennedy was killed.
Yeah, this is Johnson administration. And so what had happened, Johnson didn't know what to do with me. Okay. And all the blackball stuff came up during the Kennedy administration. And that was generic stuff. Like they were just waiting to spring it. If I really did get picked, and they would spring out all this stuff.
Oh.
So all that stuff was really written during the Kennedy administration. That was systemic kind of stuff that that if this guy gets close and they really start making some decisions, then we'll spring that kind of.
Because Kennedy wanted you. I mean, did he handpick you or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a lot of support from my from my senator from Kansas.
Okay. Yeah.
He stood in for me because my senator had got my dad his first job after Dad left baseball, and so he was now the senator. But his brother was a chemist, and it was so bizarre. My dad dropped out of school when he was in 10th grade, and lo and behold, the senator's brother taught him chemistry. He was a PhD in charge of the Missouri State Grain Department. And he trained my dad, and my dad ended up as the chief chemist for the Kansas State Grain Department, and their offices are next door to each other.
Wow.
And so, but what happened was they called me in. They didn't know what to do. Johnson didn't know what to do with me. He really, and he was getting all this advice, and so General Terry Hume was his kind of handler guy to decide, what we're going to do with this guy. So I got called in. What they said was that you understand politics, you're a Kennedy appointee, and President Johnson needs his own man. Okay, now we want to make you a deal. You're going into space, period. Okay, but the president has to have time to get his own astronaut. We want you to stand down, stop making speeches. Because I was on the speaking circuit like nobody's business at that time. Yeah,
you were on cover of magazines, Jet, and all those.
Yeah. And so they said, well, we need you to voluntarily stand down and let the president have his own astronaut. And it's going to take 3 years, okay? And he asked me if I had one of them globes that spin around. And I said, no. He said, go get one, close your eyes, and wherever you put your finger, that's where we're going to send you. And you will get a check every month. No more speeches, period. No more public appearances. No more interviews. None of that stuff. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And so that's why I had my base of choice anywhere in the world. So I picked top secret base, Holloman Air Base down in White Sands Missile Range, which is all top secret stuff down there, off the grid. They didn't have a newspaper in Alamogordo. I mean, so everything was working for me really good. And my commander I was flying all the airplanes, and we were doing real flight test missions. We were doing NASA missions. It was unbelievable. And I was just happy as a bug in a rug, And I went to the flight line one day, and my crew chief was a 19-year-old little black kid. And he says, Captain Dwight, I'm really scared. But the kid starts crying, man. I'm going, what's up? He said, 2 guys came down here and asked me, what would it take for me to fix your airplane so it wouldn't come back? I said, what are you talking about? I said, that's not funny. And he says, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. They asked me if I wanted, they did this, do you want more stripes or do you want cash? What do you want? 2 guys in long black coats. And so they were waiting for an answer. And so I just said, I got this. Everything's fine. I got it. Don't worry about it. You'll never hear from these guys again. And so I went to ops, and I told them I wasn't flying. And so, are you sick? No. I said, I'm just not flying today. Okay. And he said, we got to put you on report. Go ahead. Went to my office, and I resigned. Mm. And the next thing you know, and the Air Force doesn't operate this way. And 2 hours after they got that Twix, there was a Twix back to my commander out there that he's not going anywhere. He's going to jail. And so we bring in charges against him. And they had pre-planned, I guess they had that set up too, that I had violated all of this chain of command. So as a result of that I was violating military law. And they figured it out that it was 21 years in the stockade, no parole, losing all voting rights and all medical, they had a whole list of things that I would lose. And my commander stood in for me, and he said, no, because I know this guy, and he's been out, he's one of my best pilots, and if he goes, I go with him, So they negotiated, and the negotiation was I had to be off the base in 72 hours.
Wow.
And all my furniture, I had to give my furniture away, and then I was never to come on another military installation for the rest of my entire life, or a government building. And so I went out to try to get a job, and I lucked out at IBM because my wife said, IBM just came to town. Ed, why don't you go down and talk to IBM? I walk in there, and the assistant head of the office, Hal Rumpf, who was to fly jets with in the Air Force. And I walk in there, and I got my uniform on. I walked in there, and he said, Dwight, what are you doing here, man? I said, hell, we did the whole hug thing, I said, what's up? I said, man, I'm looking for a job. And he said, you can start tomorrow. And they never did a background check. Because of Hal, he introduced me to Bob, his boss, and everything. This guy's hot, man. We got a good one here. I left the military real quick, and I started working for IBM.
Wow.
That is a crazy story. I'm sitting here just flabbergasted because I'm like, that is amazing.
But that was an aftermath because I couldn't get a job when I left because I really had been applying while I was at IBM. And then some of my sponsors, like Whitney Young and some leaders of the Black community, they found out about all this, and they were trying to get me jobs in the industry, because they said, well, Dwight, you belong in the, because there are other jobs other than being an astronaut. You can be a scientist, you can be, a project director, you can do any of those things, and this background thing kept popping up. Over and over again, and so we ran around trying to find George Jeffs at Lockheed. When Lockheed moved to LA, I went out, interviewed, start next week, and this is still I was working for IBM at that time, and I went out, and then it happened again about a few years later when I was in the construction business. I got a call from George Jeffs called me from Lockheed in LA. And says, we heard something about how you left the military and we got a job for you here, a project, we start $90,000 and stock options and everything, And I went out and interviewed and everything was fine, man. And then George got, finally that thing worked its way to his desk. And he said, I can't touch this, Ed. I'm sorry. I'd like to, but I can't. This is just too hot. Because you got too many people that we need. If we hire you, we got too many people that are against you. That there are that we can supply things to.
Right.
And we got to keep those relationships open.
Right, because then it affects them.
Yeah. So, but anyway.
So circling back to your art career,
yeah,
you essentially started as your professional art career in your 40s.
That's 45. Yeah, when I left. Yeah,
which is most people don't think that at that point. You're either already established and going full bore, but you just changed gears and decided that, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. You had the opportunity. And at what point did you open your studio and foundry?
Well, that whole art thing, what's fascinating about it is that when I started doing art, the whole art community kind of turned against me, because I was a latecomer. Mm-hmm. And you had all these careers that are established and stuff like that, And then rather than starting if I was New York, if I was been in New York, I would have probably concentrated on what they now call black art, which would be kind of the genesis of it would be African American images with some coloration out of Africa, doing some abstract thing, paste up stuff and collages, using black people, and all that kind of stuff. But I was out west here. And the only art out west here was Western art. Cowboys and Indians, And so all of a sudden, because of George and doing this Western stuff about why blacks came west, well, it was black cowboys, black this, black that, but, So I started recording that. And the white conservative community says, oh, my God, there were black cowboys? Oh, there were the horse racing guys? And you got to be kidding. The guy that won the first Kentucky Derby in 1874 was black? And the guy that won the most Kentucky Derbies from 1874 to 1948 were all black? No, you got to be kidding. And I was having these exhibits in the First National Bank lobby downtown, and all these oil guys from Oklahoma were coming here because of financing here in Denver. And I'm selling art to all these conservative white guys, and they're racing to see who can own more of these black things because I got more Dwights than you have. And it really didn't have anything to do with the black community. It had to do with Ed Dwight selling art that they loved because it's Western, but the guy just happened to be black and it's rare. And this guy, and it's so good. This guy, and so all of a sudden I get this kickback from all the white art community. I say, you don't belong to us, guy. Get out of here. You do not belong to us. So, and so my white collectors are saying, I got 2 Dwights, and the white collectors are telling these guys that, And so I started doing really weird things, when I'd say weird things, creative things with negative space. I came up with this negative space idea. And I was in this white art club, the headquarters of Lubbock, Texas. And so I walk in there for their annual invitation, and I walk in there with 4 or 5 of my deals with negative space, where I got the horse's head, but ain't no body, or I got this guy standing up with just a rifle there. And these guys castigated me like you will not believe. How could you violate this? God, you're violating art and the whole constituency of what. How can you dare do this? At the end of that particular show, all 5 of my pieces walked out of the thing sold. Okay? And so next year I go down there, Everybody, everyone, the white guys have everything cut away, but you have these yellow slickers that the cowboys wear. All you see is a slicker flying in the air, and the horse's head's out there, and there's a guy's head right here. And so, but the collectors saw that, but I was brought into the bosom because the black art community went, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. That guy cannot be that good. Who is this man? So then, years I wasn't doing it. I had a white backup guy here that was doing all this art, and I was fronting for this guy because there's not a chance that my art could be this good, just coming out of the box. I didn't get any acceptance. I got castigated from the whole black art community. It just castigated me. Yeah,
so you got it from both sides.
Oh hell yes. The only thing I could do under the circumstance was know that I was right, know that I was doing it, and that's the only salvation I had, you know what I mean? And I invited all of them to come here and watch me do it. I got to the studio and not one of them showed up. Not a single one of them showed up. And then as I was going through these towns, I got 13 memorials in Atlanta, Georgia, and Atlanta's a big black art community down there, okay? And so, so I decided that since I can't join them, I got to beat them. So as I was going from town to town, they'd have these receptions, all backed up by the white community, Like when I went to Atlanta, I started at the top. I had a show at the High Museum, which is about the 3rd or 4th museum in the country, okay? The National Park Service had a show for me at the Arch in St. Louis because they picked me up and sponsored me. They saw a magazine article and said, this guy's hot. We'll take him to all our museums around the country, because he's got it. He's got what we're looking for. And I'm digressing a little bit here. When I did the thing in St. Louis, the Park Service, I was down there for my reception. I was very enterprising because you can't sell art in the Park Service museums. So I talked to these guys into letting me sell art in the Park Service Museum. And I said, we can't put prices on it. I said, well, just put a number on there. I said, because, you have a nonprofit that runs your gift shop, okay? And you want money for your nonprofit that runs your gift shop and all that kind of stuff. So why don't you put a menu of my art and a price list on the desk of the cashier up there. So if some of these white people would walk through here and wonder about, is that art for sale? Then you say, well, yes, it is, and I'll give you 10% of the take. So I'm selling art in these museums, which you're not supposed to do, by the way. So, but anyway, the Park Service said, we found our guy. They shipped me to Harper's Ferry, and I go up, and they adopt me, and they give me 5 memorials. He said, we've been looking for you for 5 years. We've had these black memorials sitting here, and we've been looking for an African-American to do these sculptures of Buffalo Soldiers, Harriet Tubman, stuff like that. And so they gave me 5 memorials off the bat. Now, I went up there and I lied. I'd been doing this gallery art, and I had never done a large sculpture in my life. And so they asked me, oh, you have done monumental pieces, haven't you? And I said, yeah, I've done a few. And so you got the images? Oh, I didn't bring any. I didn't bring any with me, but I'll send them to you. Okay. And we didn't have this internet thing where you could just go do it. So they gave me 5 pieces. Well, the larger, I call it the Black Art Intelligentsia, found out about this, that the National Park Service has given this guy from Denver 5 memorials to do black people. And they went to the Congressional Black Caucus to kill it. It says there's nobody, first of all, there ain't nobody in Denver that's good enough to do this, and we got black artists all over this country that are starving that need to do this. And at first they thought I was white. They said I was a white guy out there in Denver. And so finally they were told I was black. And they said, well, even if he's black. And so they got together in the black art community and went to Congressional Black Caucus, and they killed the contract that I already had written with the Park Service. And so my man called me up and said, hey, we got a problem. We got to cancel the contract. I said, well, this is crazy. I've spent a lot of money on this thing already, and you're going to write me a check for the money that I spent if you're going to do it this way. And I could easily sue you guys because I have a contract with you. I have a live, well contract with you. I can get a lawyer and sue you for the amount of money I spent and probably some damages, And
that was probably a pretty significant amount of money, I imagine, for 5 commissions.
Yes. And so finally, I called Gary Hart, who was the senator, and Pat Schroeder, who was a congresswoman. And Gary Hart would live a couple doors down from me there. And I called Gary. I said, Gary, this is what these cats are doing. So they called the National Park Service. They didn't go to the Congressional Black Caucus. They called the National Park Service. What the heck's going on? And so by the time Gary and Pat Schroeder went to the Park Service, so the Park Service had to change everything around and say, okay, we have selected 5 black artists to replace Dwight, which they had already done. And Dwight's out, when they told me the contract was null and void, I was out. So the guy calls me up and tells me that, okay, we're going to move it to 6, but you got to do the competition. Okay, that was a compromise we made. And so the sculpture had to be there June the 29th, the model. Drove this thing all the way to be to 4 o'clock deadline. And they were leaving at 4:30, and I come driving up they have a big circle that goes into Harper's Ferry. He said, what are you doing here? I said, today's the deadline. He said, oh my God, I forgot to call you and tell you that we had moved the deadline to next October because nobody could get it completed. I said, well, I got mine completed. And he said, why don't you take it back to Denver and do some? I said, no, I'm not taking that back to Denver. I'll leave it here. And 3 months pass. I get a call from Mike Hoover says, can you get up here tomorrow? There'll be a ticket waiting for you I said, what's going on? Well, you won the competition. I said, I won what competition? I had totally forgot about the damn thing. It's a Frederick Douglass competition. I said, what are you talking about? I didn't do any Frederick Douglass competition. What are you talking about? He says, Ed, you won the competition. You okay? Get up here. And so I went out there, and they met me at a limo at the National Airport and flew me up there. And they had this big ceremony, and the head of the, not the Park Service, but the whole Interior Department was there. He comes up in a limo. And the head of the guy comes up to me and he said, thanks for saving us. I said, saving you from what? I didn't know what you're talking about. He said, haven't you seen the competition? I said, no. But, he said, well, come on in. And so we walked through there, and the first guy, Frederick Douglass' head was this big, and his body was that big. I mean, it was horrible. And one woman had he was bent over like the whole statue was bent over like this, and his legs were bow-legged. And she had painted the fluorescent green. And this supposed to be a bronze sculpture. And he was down like this, and he had his book in his hand, and his head was looking up like that. And he said, and he was joking. He said, this was your worst competition here. We were torn between yours and and she had painted, she had taken and painted, she had eyebrows went up like this, and she had put sequins all in here with these sequins, and then she had glued these false eyelashes to this bronze sculpture. To this sculpture. I looked at it, I said, I ain't never seen anything like this in my life. And I said, where's my sculpture? Well, we're unveiling it in the auditorium. So I went in there, they had this big unveiling, big ceremony and all that kind of stuff. And so that was my first encounter with the black art community, okay? Because they told the Park Service that they had all these famous black artists that were incredible. And this Dwight guy was not, And so that got me going, and I was the go-to guy from that point on. It didn't. So
just kind of snowballed from there as far as.
It went crazy, and then I was getting, I was lucky, and this astronaut thing didn't hurt, because back in our minds of women, this guy. There's something about this guy. Now, how could this guy be an astronaut guy and be an art guy? What's up with it? But let's play it for a little, if it's going to fall on his face and crash, it'll do later on. But right now, he's kind of looking kind of good. And so people were coming in from out of the rain, And so now I got this deal at the Park Service in St. Louis. The head of the city council in Atlanta, Georgia, calls me up and says, we need this in Georgia. Okay, can you come down and do it at the High Museum? Now, like I told you, the High Museum is hot stuff, right? And so he calls up, and the old guy, the really created Coke, he gave them hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to keep the museum going. And so the councilman would call him, and because they said, no, we ain't gonna, we don't know that Dwight guy. We don't know nothing about that guy. We ain't gonna have no show for him. And so some phone calls are made. Next thing you know, I got this big exhibit at the High Museum down there in Atlanta. And so now I open at the High. Now, over that big black population in Atlanta, I was boycotted. Now, one black showed up doing the exhibit. It was all high-end white guys. And the highest-end white guy was a guy that sold the teams to Ted Turner. And his number two guy was at the exhibit, Bob Hunter. So Bob comes up to me and he says, here's my list of how I want. And he says, how long are you going to be here? I said, well, I'm leaving Sunday. He said, no, you're not. Monday morning, be out in front of your hotel and I will pick you up. And I didn't know this guy from Adam. I didn't know that he was connected to the hierarchy there in Atlanta. And next thing you know, he picks me up and he said, that slide presentation you were giving at the exhibit, bring it, but cut it down to 18 minutes because you were going like 28 minutes and we cut 10 minutes off of it. This guy took me to every law firm in Atlanta, Georgia, of all the other top law firms in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're sitting in this big boardroom and they, how many do you want? Bob would say, how many do you want? Well, we'll settle for 5. And we'll go to the next law firm. and it turned out to be about 50 sculptures of my high-end sculptures. I mean, I'm talking about $20,000, $30,000 sculptures. And this is a top, people. So now, before I leave, I'm groping for this guy's name. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, Bob took me up to his boss's deal in Northwest Atlanta, and we're sitting around the pool drinking mint juleps. True story. And the guy looks at me and said, what do you want? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know what I want, And he gave me a story. He said, why don't you become my art consultant? Because I just bought a Henry Moore for $6 million. And why don't you go on over to England with me and tell me if I made the right decision? Now, I got a contract from that guy with $6 million, and the contract was this thick. I gave the man the $6 million, and I don't own it. And with all the stuff in the contract, I'll never own this sculpture that I paid $6 million for, and I have to take care of it. I've got to do all these things, but I'll never end up owning this thing. And then he said, Bob, what about that Hank Aaron piece we're doing at the stadium? He said, well, let me call Leroy. Leroy was the state senator that was in charge of the deal there. And he calls him up and he said, we gave the thing yesterday to Felix de Weldon. And Felix de Weldon is the guy that does the Iwo Jima sculpture, okay? And so I called him up and asked him what it was his net profit. And he gets this guy on the phone and he says, about 60,000. And he says, hang up, Bob. He said, write the guy a check for 60,000. Ed, would you like to do the Hank Aaron sculpture? I'm going, I said, well, yeah, I guess. So what do you mean you guess? Do you want it or not? They'll go, well, yeah. And so he says, okay, the next move. Now, you know what the next move is. You know you got to move to Atlanta. So he introduces me to Ted Turner. And so next thing you know, I'll go to see Ted Turner, and Ted's a wild man and everything. So they had already done Ty Cobb at the stadium, okay? And so we had a list of 5 big stars in history that they were going to surround the thing with. Hank was going to be the first one and all that kind of stuff. And so they said, you got to move to Atlanta. What we'll do if you'll move down here, we'll give you a studio. The only thing you got to pay is your utilities. We'll supply apprentices. We have the Georgia School of Art over here. We'll supply all the apprentices you need, but we need you in Atlanta, Georgia, okay? Because we need some leadership down there. We need some art leadership down there, and we got a lot of memorials to do, okay? And lo and behold, I ended up doing 13 memorials for these guys, but I refused to move. But there's 13 of them down there, and they were all over the place. But I've been lucky in this thing in meeting. I guess I've driven a lot of jealousy a little bit in the Black art community because I have made these contacts that they have been unable to make during that era, of time. So all the famous Black artists, Sam Gilliam was the only one that came to my rescue. He's out of Washington, D.C., really incredible guy. But he brought me to Washington, D.C. and took me to dinner. And he said, Ed, he was telling me I was telling him my stories, and he said, well, Ed, you screwed up. I said, what did I do wrong? He said, Ed, you should have went to every one of these people in the Black art, Bill Elizabeth Catlett, Driscoll, and all these, and ask them, could you be an artist in this environment? And kiss their ring and give them maybe 4 or 5 pieces of your original work. Then they would have invented that they invented you, because they own your work. So therefore, they've got to back you up now. And you didn't do that, I said, well, it's kind of late now, but I felt now, I've got memorial. I've done 129 memorials. So, come on, what do I need with that? And
right.
And I really didn't need it. Okay.
And that's not your style.
Right. But a lot of them came around on the backside, later on when they saw that this was really for real, that I was not a fake, and I didn't have a white person doing all my art for me, and they were, we don't know how you did this, you get that kind of stuff, and how are you continuing to do this, and what's driving you, and but when you start getting at that level, like the memorial level, having a track record of good things, and then the white hierarchy looks at that. I'm the first guy they call to see how much it's going to be, and if it's too much, then they'll go to their second thing, But it's all about money. If I came in at low enough prices, not hardly making a lot of money, I could get all of it, But you got to make some money to keep things going, And
absolutely, this is a huge studio that you have here and a foundry. And talking to other sculptors, we know for a fact that it costs a lot of money to do this kind of art.
How does $55,000 a month?
That's a lot of money, man.
And that's overhead.
Wow.
Man, the taxes, they kill you. Oh, these taxes are, my accountant said, remember, you pay 23 different kinds of taxes, right? But this is what you got to do. And it's hard to explain to people that, especially with the Black clients I have, that's hardest of all, asking me questions. What are you going to do with all that money? And then I have my Black clients suggesting, even a couple of white clients suggested that, you know what, we got this budget here. Why don't you get that, ask them for that minority break I said, what minority break? What are you talking about? They'll charge you less money. Don't they have programs where they charge you, for your materials, you pay less money because you're black? I said, well, I haven't found those kind of suppliers yet that want to give me a 10% black break. What's up with this? I said, are you crazy? I said, I'm going to go to somebody and say, I'm black, so when I go buy my browns down there, I want a black break, a minority break, 10% minority or 15% minority break. I'd get a laugh. They'd never sell me another thing. That's crazy, to even suggest something like that. But there are real people who will tell you, ask you that, why don't you, because you're a minority, man. You ought to, did you ask for it? I said, no, and I'm not going to. What is going on here? But those are the kind of things you run into. But I just have to keep on going for people who do understand this and leave the other people alone, because every one of those things, every single one of those things have always turned out bad. Where I got stuck, the Black Patriots Memorial in Washington, D.C., these people that were the operators of that thing, I was with it for 14 years. And there were three things. There was going to be a triangle, and this was early city planning, area planning in the Washington, D.C. area. One was a memorial to Dr. King, one was a black museum, and the other one was a Black Patriots Memorial right on the mall near the Lincoln Memorial, okay? I worked on that thing for 14 years. And the people who were sponsoring this thing kept stealing the money. We'd get $5 million here or $7 million there, and next thing you know, all the money's gone. And then it turns out the Secretary of the Treasury was from Denver, Colorado, and she signed the dollar bills, and she loved me to death because I was from Denver. And she said, Ed, why don't we do a coin? I can get you $5-10 million with selling a coin. So I designed this wonderful coin, and sure enough, man, we $5 million from that coin, man, and it disappeared. With these black operatives running these things up there, and General Motors adopted me as was our company artist. For a minute, where Bill Brooks and I were in the service together. He was the head of the foundation there. He was a black guy. And so they sponsored a lot of them. I did a lot of General Motors art, or the inside art for General Motors, awards and stuff like that, And then they got involved in the Black Patriots Memorial, and they put millions of dollars into that memorial, and they kept stealing the money. Money kept disappearing. So finally Congress got tired and said, we're not going to play with you anymore. They gave us like 60 days to stop it, clean it up. And we didn't make the thing, so we lost an incredible memorial, 90-foot long memorial with the whole history of blacks from the Revolutionary War, because this was dedicated to the 5,000 blacks that fought in the Revolutionary War. It's incredible that we lost it because of self-dealing and stealing the money. And one of the guys, he and his wife went and took a round-the-world trip, and they were running marathons around the world with money that belonged to this memorial. Going to Paris and Australia and Belgium, running marathons with this money. Put his wife on this $160,000 a year salary. Just bizarre stuff like that,
And nobody was held accountable, I'm sure.
There's an interesting thing that I learned about all this here, is that these companies that do this, that give the money, if something goes wrong, the last thing in the world they want is to have the public know that they gave money away and didn't account for it. So they bury it. Okay. And so the Kodaks and the General Motors, they had to eat all that money that they gave to this project. They had to eat it because they couldn't go public and go after these people who took the money, because that would make a big stink, and they would get criticized. But it would also discourage other large corporations to come in and give free money, if you will, to these black projects. And that's part of it that hurt the most, was that, that if we can't, and don't get me on the Dr. King Memorial, because we'd be here for the next 5 hours.
That'll be another episode.
Yeah, I'm serious, because that needs its own podcast. I'm writing a book about that. But no, there are 5 books that are on the table, and one of them, the title of the book that is called "The Politics of Art from a Black Perspective."
Oh my God, that's awesome!
And it has to do with all these politics that I've just given you the icing, the stuff up here. I mean, because like I say, we'd be here for hours talking about. I could take you from project to project to project, and the politics involved in it. And some of it dirty politics, if you will. And this Dr. King Memorial was the absolute worst. I mean, the collusion, it was just unbelievable. There's another guy that was involved in it. His name was Gilbert Young, and he got a lot more of the inside information because I'd come up with a plan. Like my engineering report. I wrote them a 44-page engineering report about because I designed that thing. I have the model for the design that was approved by the Fine Arts Commission. That was the only one approved by the Fine Arts Commission. Okay, and what they did. Well, I don't want to get way in the weeds on this thing at this point in time, but to make a long story short, these guys, this Chinese guy was supposed to be working for me. He was in my studio. I have pictures of this guy in my studio, okay? The guy that ended up doing it, okay? And all the stuff that went on, a lot of lies were told. I wrote a 44-page engineering report about the sculpture that's sitting up there now. And I told him the thing was too large because I had designed the thing where you put the fascia on the outside with the stainless steel structure on the inside. That's solid, grinded all the way through. And now the whole goddamn thing is falling apart. If you go see it now, they got all these blue, I don't know, some kind of blue glue that they're putting in these cracks. The whole thing is maybe take 10 years to 15 years more, but the whole goddamn thing is falling apart. Mm-hmm. And it's going to fall apart. It's going to keep cracking until it falls apart because it was not designed engineering-wise. And even though they supposed to have gone down to bedrock and drilled all that stuff all the way down to bedrock, but the statue is gone. All you got to do is go look at it. And they poo-pooed me and told me I didn't know anything about anatomy, and they told me I didn't know anything about what do I know about engineering, So yeah,
we'll wrap this up because we've taken a lot of your time, and I really appreciate you allowing us to spend this time with you this afternoon. So what does the future hold for you? What are your plans? What are you working on right now?
Well, right now I got to finish Mayor Webb for his building downtown. And then I got a Harriet Tubman project in South Carolina that I'm doing. I just shipped a Mickey Leland, a congressman that got killed in a plane in Africa. I just shipped that out a few weeks ago. There's a lot on the table. I mean, a tremendous amount. There's stuff in San Francisco. There's stuff up and down the coast, and there's another big one in Houston, and and I'm trying to appraise these things because I've been offered an opportunity in Ontario, California, to move my entire operation there, and after all this publicity, word gets out about things and stuff like that, and they had heard that I was interested in retiring in Palm Springs and offered me a deal to come to move my entire operation to Ontario and provide me space down there to how much ever space I need, 100,000 square feet, 50,000 square feet, whatever, for $1 a year, to come to move my operation down there. And but what I got to finish I got to write some more books. I got a lot of books to write. I don't have a book on my art, on the history of my art, and I got to write a book on the memorials because I've got so many public art pieces out there, and that needs recording, And then there's Politics of Art book and everything, and there's some other books, things you learn in life lesson things that you learn. I don't know what to title that one yet, but things because in the Black community because I give a lot of speeches to Black kids and trying to get them to understand. We've come to the table since Dr. King's gone. We come to the table where you guys are mean to us, and and we deserve this, we deserve that, and you guys are rigged them. The whole system is rigged against us, okay? And the system is kind of rigged, but you don't sit on the sidelines whining about it all the time. You got to get out and do something about it. And I find in my life that to gain the respect of the larger community, you got to produce something. And you got to figure out what are the avenues and how do you navigate that to get the larger community to recognize that you exist. But you got to bring something to the table that's worthy of their consideration, you know. And it could be work, it could be inventions, it could be positive energy, it could be all these things that you need to exist in this environment. But you got to take the environment that you have. You can't redo the whole damn environment and do it through white guilt. You cannot do that because there are too many people like our president that don't give a dang about white guilt. They don't care anything about any white guilt, you know. And so as a result of that, if you don't come to the table with something that's respectable and productive and for the movement of the whole society moving ahead, and spend more time giving a quality product to the system that we operate in. Now we can start yelling at the guy, wait a minute, we've delivered a quality product to you. And the only quality product that we seem to have given that the white folks respect is music and athletics. You know, these black guys can go play basketball and do all this wonderful stuff, and all their customers are white. You go to an NBA basketball game and count the number of black people that are there. I mean, a football game, same way. You know, Bronco Stadium, you might maybe 1-2% of the people that are black that are going to see the Broncos play. You know, so all this stuff is for white amusement, you know. And the music thing, you know, that's kind of a closed thing there. If you're not super talented and all that kind of stuff, you know, it's hard to make a dent there. And you can do message music, but that only lasts so long, you know. Talking about if you write songs that criticize the white community, well, you know, that only goes so far. You make a few black people happy by singing songs like that, but that's the only way to make money because white people will pay to go see you, you know. And so that's what this thing's all about. But when you move over into the sciences and into other things, and it's not just astronauts, it's engineering, it's all kinds of things. It's accounting, it's community building. And Robert Smith, the black billionaire guy, he's a gifted guy. My daughter taught him in high school, you know, his mother was my wife's assistant principal, you know, and Robert has come to the conclusion that's, and it has to be, and he's giving money away. They gave away $40 million to Morehouse College graduates and stuff like that, you know, and that helps a little bit. But you know, but if you take those kids on one-on-one and analyze, what are they going to do with that money? I mean, you know, they're going to get their colleges paid for, but now what are you going to do? What product are you going to bring to the system? Or are you going to take it and just go say, well, I got my college paid for, so enough said. I can kick back and go get a regular job and, not understanding that Robert Smith, due to his brilliance, he was able to assemble a $5 billion corporation, you know what I mean? Because the guy is absolutely brilliant. But he's now spending his money on trying to build communities because we don't have any community builders, and if we don't have community builders that in the black community to help these kids think in a different way, because the only thing that these kids live for is that dang cell phone. I mean, that's their whole life. They live by that and what they can say. They think they got a lot of power by saying nasty things on Facebook. That gives me power. They don't have any power. All they're doing is just, I was going to say it's a useless act that men do every now and then. That's crazy. The whole damn thing's crazy. I was doing an interview, I guess it was yesterday, and she was asking me, how would you rewrite history? If you had a chance to rewrite, how would you rewrite it? I said, I wouldn't. I said, because we got what we got, and we're here in this space, and there's nothing about rewriting history. There's no fantasy that I could conjure up that would make white people like me better than they like me. You know what I mean? And so the only thing left is if they don't love me, I got to have them respect me. And so therefore the issue is, how do you make people respect you, in jobs? Because I have these women astronauts call me, what am I doing wrong? Some are in the program or engineers that are graduates, have master's degrees in aerospace engineering, and they work for these companies. And they call me up. What am I doing wrong? I can't get promoted. I can't do this. And they'll laugh at me. I just did this thing with Blacks in Space in California. And I don't know the girl's name, so she's safe. But she walked up to me after my speech, and she had braids all the way down to her waist, and the dreadlocks and things all the way down to her waist. And she asked me, she said, I can't seem to get in. I'm a Navy pilot. Graduated from pilot training, and I'm a Navy pilot. And they just won't give me a break. And the first thing I wanted to say, cut that goddamn hair off and act like a Navy officer, and they may give you a break. I said, what is going on here? Are we crazy? Now, why in the world would this is a white man's world you're living in here, girl. You're probably the only Navy pilot in the unit. And you're going to go to work with braids under how do you get your helmet on and keep the braids? How do you go eject from an airplane where you get braids get in the way of trying to pull this thing? I said, come on. What in the world with it? What's going on with that? But that's what's going on. With this generation of kids that we're dealing with, man. I mean, well, I deserve to wear these. This is my black pride. And I said, well, maybe your black pride doesn't work in the white community. White people don't come to the table and say, well, I got a lot of white pride, and I'm gonna flash it on you. I'm gonna flash all my white pride on you. You know what I mean? And they don't do that. They might be casual about giving you your due. They might, if they are prejudiced, but the whole idea is you got to show them that they're errant in their prejudice. And the only prejudice they have is that you're not as good as they are. Okay, and that's the only prejudice they got, is that you're not good enough. And so therefore, get good enough.
Be prepared and produce.
You got it. And that's the story of my life. And
That's what your parents told you.
Yeah. But anyway.
Well, Dwight, thank you so much for taking this time out of your day. We really appreciate it. I know we went longer than you wanted us to.
Guys. Get out of here. What's up with this?
And we would love to come back and learn some more if you have time, when you have time. On behalf of the Tenet Podcast, I'm Wes Brown.
And I'm Todd Pearson.
Thanks.
Good. Okay, guys.